Welcome to Bat Therapy, mental health through the lens of comics and film. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness.
We're your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown and educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and social media and find our Patreon at patreon.com/battherapy.
This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources.
All right, so when we did the season where we focused on villains, we watched this movie and we focused on Eric Killmonger. Now we're going to swing back around and we're going to talk about T'Challa tonight. So this season has been no cape. So we're really focusing on heroes outside of the costume. And one of the things that's really interesting to me about T'Challa is he is a sovereign. He is the king of his country. Before that, he was the prince, and we saw that when he was in Civil War, and
Which is definitely another one we'll have to talk about sometime.
Yes, because
I have thoughts, and Keaton has different thoughts, so we'll have to definitely talk about that movie exclusively at some point.
Because and I mean it's pretty simple because I see how Captain America is clearly the one in the right in Civil War, and tonight I feel like Dr. Amelia Brown is playing devil's advocate and saying that he's not.
Well, someone who essentially creates an entire civil war just because he wants to save his bestie and also doesn't talk to anybody else and assumes they won't help him. And then you see later on that once they find out the truth, they would have helped him all along. Yeah. He essentially brought all of that upon all of them, which was super cool.
Yes, he brought on the Sokovian Accords, named after Sokovia, the country that was destroyed by Ultron, who was invented by Tony Stark without the rest of the Avengers'
So what
permission.
You're saying is there needs to be oversight because just because you have the ability to do one thing doesn't mean you have the best reasons for how to decide things. Thank you, Keaton.
Bat Therapy, Civil War.
Civil War, Civil War. Anyway, we could talk about that movie later because today is about Black Panther. It's about T'Challa.
Yes.
We'll get back on the same page.
He's so damn good.
He's so good. I want Chadwick Boseman back.
Damn it. I hate this. But such a good movie. And so T'Challa is very interesting because there's a very short period of time between Civil War and Black Panther, like when it takes place, because in Civil War, he's basically trying to avenge his father that was killed, and then by Zemo, now that we know that. But in Black Panther, you see him going after his love interest and getting her from undercover because he's like, I'm about to be crowned king. So clearly it's a very, very short amount of time. Yeah. And so there's a lot of willing and dealing that he has to do outside of anything related to Black Panther, because this is something that's also really interesting about Black Panther. He is not, especially in this movie and in these, he is not a superhero for the world. He is the protector of Wakanda. It's very, very different. And not only is he the protector of Wakanda, he's the protector and secret keeper of Wakanda. Everyone thinks Wakanda is like a third world country that with textiles coming out of it. And they're literally the opposite. They're the most technologically advanced people on the planet, and he is their leader and protector.
There are so many layers to his character. So, I mean, we've talked so much about how complicated it is to juggle being the vigilante, the superhero, whatever entity you want to call someone, and the alternate identity, and also that balance of which one are you and how that might differ, how much you identify with one or the other based on who you are. And then here's T'Challa, who is really supposed to be this really 100% solid persona
Hmm.
in two identities. So
Right.
there's and at the start, so it seemed like I guess his dad had maybe given him the mantle of Black Panther. I guess maybe he aged out of that part and then
Right.
remained king. But it
Hmm.
seems like for my understanding is that for generations it's been this way where the
Yes.
power of the Black Panther it that led to one person leading all these different tribes and then that was
Yes.
passed along. So it's essentially this just incredibly impressive if not impossible feat of being the protector and as well as the king or the sovereign of the nation.
Hmm.
And like you said, I think it is really important to focus on the fact that it is country focused. Now,
Right.
arguably, I mean, let's be real, most of these superheroes are United States focused. I mean, they
Yeah.
go out of the
That's
country, but
true.
his name's Captain America. Come
Yeah,
on.
the MCU,
So,
especially the MCU, really, like, Marvel Comics has definitely touched on international superhero teams, but like Alpha Flight is Canadian, and then like
mm,
there's like a British team of superheroes. Like there's superhero teams all over the world. I mean,
yep,
Big Hero 6, they're in, like, and
yep.
so
Yeah,
it's
there's definitely
but
I mean, it
Marvel,
is an
yeah.
interesting question though, which comes up in Civil War, and once again, that's not what we're focusing on here, but where do your loyalties lie?
Hmm.
And there's also this interesting piece too of where culturally do you lie? Because
Right.
how you superhero is going to be affected by where you come from and what your values are and there might be disagreements, which is probably why you see all of these more Americanized, and even if they're coming from other places, more Americanized ones grouping together. And then you all of a sudden here's Black Panther plopping
Hmm.
it. And I feel like he's got to figure himself out outside of Wakanda very quickly because
Yeah.
he's popping up with his dad, help with the Accords, but then his dad dies. And then all of a sudden Black Panther's out there. And then all of a
Right.
sudden he's got to be king. There's just
It's a
there's
lot
a
to
heck of a
unpack.
lot going on for T'Challa.
It's a lot, and one thing that is surprising to me is they stick with they're in a highly advanced
Yeah.
civilization, but they still stick with like old traditions. Like, they're not a democratic country. Like,
Yeah.
they're very much a monarchy, and the
And there's this
strongest
like fight
person
for, yeah.
the strongest person is in charge, and I'm like, okay, I guess, sure. Like, it's
It
and
is
so
very interesting. But, think about Great Britain. Great Britain has these almost weirdly they have a king, previously a long time a queen, and yet there's parliament and there's all
you're
there's
absolutely right. And
so it's kind of a thing similar to that maybe? I
you're
don't
right.
know.
And I'll be honest, and this is in no way meant to be an insult to our British listeners. I love Britain, but I would take Wakanda any day over Great Britain.
Oh yeah, Wakanda seems amazing.
So dope. So cool.
But what I think one of the things I loved most about Wakanda and also with T'Challa too is that there is that interesting combination. And I think one of the things that honestly we tend to be pretty terrible about, at least in America, is we see progress as removing yourself from tradition. And I loved seeing this representation of where there can be this blend and this
Hmm.
acknowledgement and honoring of tradition
Yes.
with the progress. And T'Challa takes that along. I mean, he jokes with his sister about wearing his like old school sandals
Hmm.
uh during his crowning or whatever, a coronation or whatever.
Yeah. And
He uses all the technology, but very much, I mean, is very connected to his
his
country and his
roots.
people. And
Yeah, he absolutely is. And one thing I do, he does kind of come in and pick up right where his dad left off, like, okay, this guy Claude, we have to find him, we have to bring him to justice. Like, we because the whole idea is, okay, you're Wakanda's protector, and that
yeah,
means keeping them out of the limelight. That means keeping them protected by keeping their secrets. Because The thing is, from inside looking outward, it's like, no, I have to protect Wakanda from this. Like, think about the world
Mm.
we live in right now and everything going on. And he's like, this technology would only make them kill each other more.
And then Killmonger comes in and says, "Let's kill everybody."
Right.
With all these other.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And at the same time, like, and I know we talked about it, but I absolutely feel for Killmonger. I loved him as he's still top top three favorite Marvel villains easily.
Mm,
But T'Challa, he comes in, he takes the mantle, and there's this thing, and I feel like it's something that we can all kind of relate to, where no one had a perfect childhood, right?
mm,
No one had a perfect childhood. And anytime someone becomes a parent, they want to see if they can do it a little bit better than the last person. And I went straight to parent, but this also goes for anything you do. If you
yeah.
go into a job, if you get promoted and take your boss's old
Yeah.
job, you want to do it better than your boss did it, right?
Yep.
You're if you took over a city garden for someone, you're like, I
There's
need these.
always the
Yeah,
there are hopefully the things that you
right,
liked that they did that you wanna hold on to, but yeah, the things you wanna make your
right.
own or
I
you
need
wanna
these
improve
plants to be
upon and
yes,
yeah,
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 and I think that's what's going on with T'Challa. It's like, okay, I'm trying to do things the right way, but at the same time, I clearly see some things that are wrong, right? Like, okay, the fact that we left this kid there, that was messed up. I see how the rest of the world is suffering. That's messed up because I mean, honestly, I'm wondering how often until he became Black Panther and started going on missions around the world, I'm wondering how
yeah.
often he actually left Wakanda.
Well, and even as Black Panther, we don't really know what he was doing before his father died. I mean, he was there, but he was helping with the Accords, and it was very clear that at least in the United States and wherever the Avengers go, they had no idea who Black
None.
Panther was. So it was
Yeah.
very secretive, but also not really a spy kind of situation because he was
Right.
clearly doing something different than the spies for his country. But yeah, there was definitely this hidden nature, and you
Yeah.
know he he learned very quickly, and he had help. I mean, he what's
Yes.
really nice is you see he has support from all these different
Really big
angles.
support system.
Really good support system. I mean, he sees some of it fall apart as things
Yes.
go and things get tough, which is what happens, but he has all these different perspectives around him that help him be able to adjust and adapt to what's going on. But it's definitely very interesting because the the approach that you might take or what you value or what you prioritize is going to be different as the superhero and the protector in that way for your country versus the leader in the political mind of your country.
Hmm.
And you see that in the other characters. So Okoye and Nakia, when his sister and his mom are fleeing and they have a disagreement about what to do.
Hmm.
And a spy says, we gotta overthrow, we gotta get Killmonger out of here, we gotta
Hmm.
da da da. But the king's protector
Right.
and part of like the royal soldiers essentially says absolutely not. I have to go with the country and what we believe in. And so
Hmm.
he's got a very difficult position to be in because there are times where Black Panther versus the King might come into conflict and he has to figure out
Absolutely.
how to bring those together. And I think even when he has his like Mufasa moment with his dad, I
Hmm.
always I always think of that because of the
That's
background.
true.
Um and his dad's dead, so it is kind of similar, but in that moment, I think he even alludes to the fact that there's a lot you're gonna find out with being king that's different than what you've taken
Hmm.
on before, and even warns him. I think he says something about, like, "You have a good heart, and it's really hard to have a good heart and be king." And
Yeah.
so things that he was maybe able to do as Black Panther, but then he has to really complicate things with King.
And and that goes back to kind of like a running theme about how difficult it is to lead that double life and be
Hmm.
two very different people. And I think, some of the, I think we're going to get to jump into this even more with some of the coming up episodes that we have. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But with being a king, it has to be difficult because one of the things they didn't really show on much too is dealing with the day to day. How are the crops doing? What are people upset
Right?
about? What are people angry about? Because one of the things they mention is there's four different tribes of people that
Yep.
make up Wakanda.
Not
You
to
have
mention the fifth that's like hanging out in the mountains somewhere that
the
you got to worry about.
Jabaris, right? The Jabari tribe, right? Like, or they, yeah, I can't remember how many it is, but yeah, you have them, and it's like, okay, like there's like a council of people that are asking him things and like that
Yeah.
are all together and like I guess making sure to abide by the tradition, but at the end of the day he still has the last say. Like even when Killmonger challenged him, he actually was the one that was like, I accept your challenge. He didn't
Mm,
have
yeah.
to. He did
Yeah.
not have to. He was just like, I accept, especially with you coming in and talking all this trash to my people. Like, what kind of leader would I look like if I didn't accept? Right?
Yeah.
What if I didn't keep the tradition going? What if I like suddenly did? And so he's going through all of these notions. And at the same time, it's like he's also having to ride that line with anyone he comes into contact with, like when he first is chatting with Martin Friedman's character and pretending that Wakanda is
And
still,
that's another layer. He's got two masks.
yeah,
He, now, granted, Black Panther, I would assume, I could be wrong, but I would assume that there wasn't as much going on, at least for the movie version of Black Panther beforehand. More elusive things behind the scenes, because once again, all these other superhero characters didn't know of his existence.
mm-hmm,
Um, and so some of that increases over time, but still he has that mask, and then he has the mask of a farming country.
right,
I think it was the UN or wherever. They're like, I mean, no disrespect here, but what can you all offer in Wakanda? You're a farming country. And another part of the movie, they talk about it being a third world country. And
right,
yeah, so there's all of these layers that he's having to maneuver. And yeah, he has two layers to being T'Challa,
yeah.
and that's so complicated.
And they still have other stuff going on because when he goes and when you first meet Nakia, she's like an under in an undercover mission to like undo it seems to be like trafficking.
That's what it seemed like.
Like it
Yeah.
seemed to be like illegal human trafficking going on. And so it's like, okay, Wakanda does have its hands all over the place. I mean, even at
And
the beginning, the brother, his uncle, Killmonger's father,
oh right,
is
yeah.
seemingly like a spy in
Over in Oakland, yeah. Yeah.
America, and he gets in trouble for overstepping
Yep.
being a spy.
And so that's a really good point. And maybe what was happening with Black Panther is maybe he was staying mostly in Africa
Hmm.
because, you know, well, the Avengers didn't really seem to be paying much attention to that area. And they blew stuff up when they went
Hmm.
to Europe, so maybe it's for the best.
Yeah,
So they're trying to stay under the radar. They might be saying, "Hey, okay, they're taking care of stuff over here. Let's do things, a little more subtly or in areas that
right.
need more help that aren't getting the attention they need." And
Hmm.
yeah, it's definitely interesting. And there's also another piece that I think is really complicated is because of the protections around Wakanda, they're a different culture that no one knows exists.
Right.
And I'm not just talking about the technology and everything they gained from the uh, what's the mineral? The whatchamadoodle?
Oh, vibranium.
The vibranium. So
Hmm.
not just because of that, but the fact that here is this country that protected itself. And so there's also all of this history for a lot of Africa that they don't have.
Hmm.
And then there's the history of like Killmonger and the folks that were literally taken from Africa and put other places by force. And then they
Hmm.
have and there's this whole history that no one else knows.
Yeah.
And he's having to maneuver that just so many complicated things going on.
Yeah.
And it'd be so interesting to see how the UN played out, how the worldwide effects played out after Wakanda opened its doors because
Well,
there's just so much to that.
what's interesting is it wasn't very long, and that's what makes it so sad about like Chadwick Boseman passing. We never really got to see what
Mm,
else was going on in Wakanda because the thing is, right after Wakanda opened its doors, it got destroyed by Thanos and Thanos' army. Like
that's true.
right at
Yeah,
like pretty much shortly after that occurred, and then shortly after that occurred, you had Namor and his people, and they came in
yeah,
and wrecked Wakanda. So a lot of like Wakanda is, hey, we exist, and then they just constantly in this state of rebuilding and a need a leader that can oversee that and help pick up the pieces, right? Like anytime there's like
yeah.
we see like a tragedy happen, whether it's in a small town or a state or country, there needs to be someone that's like, okay, we got to pick ourselves up, we got to put things back together, whether it's after like a natural disaster or a mass shooting event or like the 9/11. It was the Rudy Giuliani then, not the one now,
Yeah.
but there's always like someone that's like, okay, we're gonna pick ourselves up back together, we're gonna go piece by piece, we're gonna get it back. And that is what the leader of Wakanda has to do, especially in those situations, but also for all of the small situations, because they also have a rule where even though everyone thinks they're a third world country, they don't accept outside help.
I know. And no one thought twice about that.
No one thought twice about it, like, huh,
Yeah. How are they doing
actually,
that?
it didn't. Everyone understood it immediately. They're like, ah, yes, pride. I get it. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's what
Yeah.
I feel like. That's what it was. Like, oh yeah, they're prideful. I feel that. That
Yeah.
reminds
We
me
get
of
that. We
us,
get that.
America. They're
I
just
have to
like
say
me.
though, thinking about all of this, T'Challa T'Challa's death, which we know came because of Chadwick Boseman.
Right.
But it came at a time that it would have been very difficult for him moving forward
Hmm.
because of all the things you're listing out. It would have been very hard to maintain his leadership because probably himself and his entire country might question a lot of those decisions that happened and how much Wakanda took on because they
Yeah.
opened up their doors. Now,
So
arguably
much.
so much.
So
Now
much.
some people I forget who it was, but someone had pointed out that the outside world is catching up in some ways and at some point we need to pay attention to this. So it was probably only a matter of time in some ways. There's only so much time they could remain a bubble probably. But there was so much that happened to Wakanda once their doors opened that even I mean like I don't think I have to argue very far to say that okay, well, without Wakanda, then Thanos probably would have just won faster.
Yeah.
so arguably there's a lot of things that would not have the bad results would have still happened.
Yeah.
But we don't think that rationally when there's so much death and destruction and the
Hmm.
world around us is torn apart and all of these things, and especially just the drastic shift for them because they were so protected,
Hmm.
literally in their dome. It would have been extremely difficult to be able to transition through that as the king.
Well,
I mean, there's a lot of major decisions that he makes, and one of the difficult things is that one, just like his dad, he's not always going to get it right.
right.
I'm not saying it was right or wrong. I'm just saying that he's not always going to get it right. He's not always going to get it perfect. And perhaps more complicated is too, you're going to have to do a lot of complicated things that there either might not be a right way to do it or a good way to do it, or you may never know. There are things that you may never know if you did the best thing or not, and you're just
Yeah.
having to make a decision,
Right.
and some pretty big ones.
And another thing too, and this is something that I'm sure people deal with on an everyday basis, is when they know they could have helped someone else but
Mm,
looked after themselves, right? Like
great
Wakanda
point.
existed when Loki invaded New York.
Great point.
Wakanda existed then. When Sokovia fell and was going up, they were going up against Ultron. Wakanda existed then,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so when he does open the doors, there are a lot of people that are angry. You
Yeah.
had this technology while we were dealing with all of this. You, you can cure paralysis here. You've
Yeah.
just been sitting on that cure. Like people are in wheelchairs that don't have to be right now. You're
Or
just,
people that have died
yeah,
that didn't have to.
you
Yeah.
have
They're able to
vibranium
heal some.
armor that could have saved how many countless lives? Like, and so I think that's a huge portion of like, as a king, it's like, okay, this is what I'm gonna have to deal with. Now, one thing I will say is he can just say, I'm trying to do things differently. We've been around for hundreds of years, and
Yeah.
I'm the first one that's like, hey,
Yep.
let's do things different. So, first off, everyone else needs to chill. So, he could take that angle with it, which is what I would do. I'd be like, you need to sit down. I could have just stayed at home, right? Like, I could have, I can take
I
this
can take my
vibranium
toys and
back,
leave.
right? I can take it back, right? You don't need armored rhinos. We just happen to have them, right?
You
And
know,
like,
it is one of those tough things because you can understand it from both perspectives. And T'Challa even is on both sides of this. Just like he has these two sometimes potentially conflicting pieces,
mhm,
identities that he takes on. There are points where he very clearly tells people, I'm not here for everybody. I am here for Wakanda.
mhm,
And then there are other times where, in order to embrace the best of what Wakanda is, can we really keep to ourselves?
right,
Or is that actually going against the very things that we pride about ourselves? And it's tricky though, because it comes at a
mhm.
cost, a huge cost.
It does. And it's also, we have to remember, everyone knows T'Challa is Black Panther. There was a
Mm,
whole ceremony where he's like, the Black Panther powers will be stripped away. And now he has them back because he's our king, the Black Panther. Like every single person knows.
oh yeah, everyone
It's
in
not like
Wakanda. Yeah.
it's not like Batman where it's like, oh man, there's someone corrupt working at Wayne Enterprises, and Batman just shows up, beats him to a pulp, and then the next day Bruce Wayne is like, man, that's crazy. He was bad all this time. How could this have happened? T'Challa can't do that. If T'Challa acts as the Black Panther, everyone
Yeah.
knows this is T'Challa that's doing this. They're not separate at all. This is the king of our nation
Yep.
acting as a vigilante.
And that's the interesting thing about it is, once again, I think it's potentially that interesting tradition versus forwardness, like that interesting combo that we see with them, because maybe at a certain point it it would be natural to have, okay, this person who has all this power and strength, and they're this symbol, and they um how the president used to be more of a commander in chief,
Mhm.
like a true commander in chief, right? You know, you have going and thinking of going into battle and all of these things,
That's
but
Black
then the
Panther. He fully
technology,
does that, right?
right? And so the, technology grows and things change and this, that, and the other, and there's more of these separations and whatnot. That separation didn't happen in Wakanda, and there's still very much this combination there. It, uh, it's definitely interesting because, yeah, what what do you want out of Black Panther?
Right.
And like you said, it can't be completely separate from the king, but in some ways it also can't be the same.
Yeah.
And so that's hard. And
Right.
he has, fortunately for him, you see it a lot of times with his sister and with his friends, and you just see these moments where he he seems fairly laid back. He's able to poke fun at himself and have fun with people, and um that's probably a good thing to be
Hmm.
able to manage all of that because oh boy.
Well, and yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, here's where it gets even more interesting. At the end of Black Panther, at the end of the first movie, he basically stages a coup. Like Killmonger had become the king fair and square. And then when Black Panther
Ah,
showed up and challenged him, he's like, "Nah, all the challenge stuff is over. I'm the king now." He said no when T'Challa said, "Yes, I accept your challenge."
but don't forget he still has that council. I mean, we don't know all the rules and everything. Here's the thing though, is that you could argue it either way. And so you no longer have a Wakanda that simply forms around the royal. You have these complicated messes where cuz you could say, well, because everyone was saying, okay, well, are you royal family? And he didn't get it. So Killmonger didn't get a chance. And so maybe he did have that right no matter what T'Challa said. I think there's an argument in either direction. Same thing here, where in order to become king, Killmonger had to kill him or have him yield, and neither of those things happened. So you
Hmm.
have these gray areas that we at least don't know any stories of that before.
Right.
And so, you know, that plus opening the borders and everything, like I was saying before, if we had seen T'Challa in the future, if they had played a lot of that stuff out, we were probably going to see some really complicated situations for him, politically
Very.
speaking, that he would have to figure out that weren't there before.
Well, what we have, yeah, because and this brings up another thing too. A lot of us out there really want to make our family happy. His
Mm,
sister is the chief scientist of Wakanda. His mom is practically his chief of staff, right?
mm,
Like she's there
yeah.
next to him every single step of the way, whatever the council is, she's right there. And so he's playing things very, very close to the chest, right? Because he's basically the king. He's also the president. He's the leader of their army. His sister makes all the weapons,
Mm.
right?
And technology in general.
And
So
technology
also
in
like
general,
kind of medical and
right?
their workforce and all sorts of stuff.
His best friend is basically in charge of their army, right? And so all of these things, it's like, okay, you're leading double relationships because it's like you're kind of their boss, but also it feels like Wakanda's definitely a family business, right? It
It
definitely,
does. And I think I mean that definitely I mean nepotism's nothing new no matter what culture you're in probably.
especially in a monarchy, that's like the
Especially in a
very definition of
monarchy.
nepotism.
Um but another thing to consider is that it seems that Wakanda is a small country.
Hmm.
Don't know the numbers, but it
Right,
seems like it's essentially one like giant city with some
right,
other stuff like smattered around and then one tribe pushed to the side.
yep,
And so another thing to consider is like it actually makes me think about being a therapist in a rural area. You literally cannot avoid dual relationships. You know, we've talked about dual relationships
ah, you
before. I think
read my
we with
mind, that was going
Professor
to be my
X.
next question.
Yeah, back when we talked about Professor X and just like all the ridiculous dual relationships he had. Um, so there are scenarios where you cannot avoid
Hmm.
having overlapping relationships. And there are some times where it just happens, just happenstance, you
Hmm.
know. You run into somebody or you happen to be in overlapping social groups and you got to figure it out. But like Wakanda, given the size it is, it's probably a little bit impossible in some ways to not have some of those complications you're talking about.
Right.
While at the same time, let's acknowledge that, yes, his sister is literally majorly in charge of things, which actually someone has an issue with.
Hmm.
It's part of the reason that M'Baku, is that his name?
Hmm. The
It's one
best.
of the reasons M'Baku gave, who I love his character, by the way. One of the reasons he gives for trying to become the new Black Panther, is why is she in charge of all these? Now, she's like a super genius, don't get me
She's
wrong.
yeah,
She's super smart. She
yeah.
clearly
She's
knows what
awesome.
she's doing.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
She's
hmm,
a kid, but still,
she's a kid, but still.
she's awesome.
Um,
Yeah,
but also, like, do we know that there's not someone else just as deserving that doesn't happen to be T'Challa's sister? I
that's
don't
a
know.
good point. That's a good point. Yeah,
Who knows?
yeah.
So it yeah. I'm totally with you, and especially with all of these things that are going to start festering in that country. T'Challa was probably like, I mean, honestly, in some ways, Thanos coming along might have made things a little bit easier. And then didn't he get snapped away?
He did.
Yeah. T'Challa, he got to take a 5-year break.
Yes, I think
Um,
him. What's wild though is I want to say him and Shuri both got snapped away.
did Shuri get snapped?
I think she did.
I don't know if they showed it. Did they show it?
I believe she. Yeah, I
I,
believe she did. I think both of them got snapped. As a matter, yeah, I'm positive because when they both come through the portal at the same time at the end,
that I
like they're
remember.
right there
Okay.
next to each other. But like, yeah, I think he was. Yeah, I think she also got got snapped away because otherwise, I mean, there would have been. Feel like there would have been a big difference in the Earth, like those 5 years, probably
Oh,
if
that's
she had.
another thing. Oh man. So
Mhm.
then it.
He came
Oh,
back after being gone for 5 years. Who was running Wakanda? I'm
who was
guessing.
running Wakanda?
I'm guessing the mom, maybe. But at the
Ugh.
same time, half of
Feel for
Wakanda,
her.
but
It's
also
time for retirement at that point.
half of Wakanda disappeared.
Yeah.
Right? It
Yeah, I
wasn't
mean,
just the leaders; it was
yeah.
everybody.
So, I mean, here's something to be said too, that there was so much turmoil. So, it's tricky because I think there are certain things about that turmoil that would have made it very difficult for T'Challa, and torn apart a lot of loyalties, that held the country together.
Hmm.
And in other respects, I mean, Thanos took a chunk out of everybody. So yes, things came straight to Wakanda, but immediately after that, Thanos snaps and all these things happen. And so some of those things might have pulled them closer together.
Hmm.
And yeah, it would have been very interesting to see what it was like returning as T'Challa, after those 5 years. I mean, all of them, obviously, but particularly so the king of that nation is coming back after all of that.
Right.
In some ways, I could see it as being this relief and being welcomed back with open arms, and in other ways, being a lot more complicated than that.
Right.
Oh, it'd be so
Absolutely.
interesting. I wish we could watch a movie.
Yeah, it was.
Oh.
I would love for there to be a movie about those 5 years when when
Mhm.
everything, yeah, because there was so much going on. We know that Hawkeye was just became a serial killer over those 5 years and just was killing countless people, right? So
That's
that was
another
one
thing when
thing.
you watch Civil War and then you think about what he does later. It's like, Mr. High and Mighty coming out of retirement telling Tony Stark, blah, blah. And I love Hawkeye, but I hated him in that movie when I thought about it later. I was like, come on, dude.
Like, oh wow, what a hypocrite, right?
Such
But
a hypocrite.
yeah, so here's my question.
Mm.
Do you think it's easier being someone like Black Panther's therapist, where all the cards on the table? You know, he's also the king of this country and doubles as a vigilante, and you know that versus Batman, who's full of secrets and potentially has two different therapists, one for Batman and one for Bruce Wayne.
Or what if you end up being the therapist for both?
Right. It's
Ooh.
like they both come in and it's like, huh, I have someone that's always busy at night, and I have another guy that's always busy during the day.
I'm
That's
now very
so interesting.
distracted thinking about, like, could I figure that out? I'm not always good at figuring out the the way around hidden agendas and things that he would
In
have to
real
have.
in real life, clearly the chin gives it away, right? Like like wait a minute,
That
you're
would
Ben
be
Affleck. Wait, I know you. You're not Batman.
bad.
Yeah.
Now I'm trying to figure out if I could figure out that I was seeing both sides of him. So it would absolutely be easier to work with T'Challa.
Yeah.
So much easier because I was actually working with someone and they were talking about taking off their mask. And I actually hear that quite a bit where whether it's talking about a mask or there's even the term masking
Mm-hmm.
for things like say autism or whatnot when you're trying to seem quote unquote normal
Mm-hmm.
or blend in with the average person.
Yeah.
um but just in general, if a person's naturally going to hide certain things and then
Right.
you add these complicated layers with these superheroes, they're these big parts being hidden.
Mm-hmm.
the The tricky thing is that the more that's being hidden, the less the therapist has at their disposal to really be able to fully understand and appreciate the person in front of them so that they can help that person maneuver things as best they can.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you if you only knew that T'Challa was some guy,
Right.
you didn't know he was king or Black Panther, or if you knew he was Black Panther but you didn't know he's king, or vice versa, you'd be
Right.
missing these huge chunks. And you could talk around it. And there are certain treatments where you don't need to disclose as much. But if we're talking about therapies where someone's trying to build some insight, or you're trying to help them through talk therapy, with growth in some way, it can be very helpful to be able to delve into these things a little bit more specifically. I mean, he could
Mm-hmm.
talk in general terms maybe and not give those things away,
Yeah.
um, but it's not necessarily going to give the same depth.
Right.
um and there's just a weight to those kinds of roles that a person like that would have. So even if you're not talking about the details, for example, if someone say has worked in combat or whatnot, or has gone through sexual trauma of some sort, or knowing these um big things that a person's dealt with, even if
Mm-hmm.
that's not necessarily details you're delving into, is helpful. So
Yeah.
being king, um, absolutely a huge factor that would
Right.
be helpful to know about. Because I mean, if someone's like, "Oh, my job's super stressful,"
Right.
but you
Well,
don't know they're the leader of a country. I mean, obviously, there are other jobs that can be really stressful too, but there are nuances to being a leader to a country that are different than another type of job.
and
So, yeah, it would definitely be easier to have more of the details.
and here's my next question. Because like we said, Black Panther is the leader of Wakanda.
Hmm.
I feel like being a very small nation, it would be very hard to be an unbiased therapist if you were a Wakandan. Like, if he's talking to you about stressful situations at work, like as the president, like, or as the king, and it's like, man, I don't want to go to war with that country. And you're sitting there as a therapist with friends who are soldiers, and it's like, yeah, you shouldn't go to war with that country, right? Like, I feel like that brings in a whole nother thing. Like, does the in order to get a good therapist, does he have to go to another country and get like an
That's a great
unbiased
question.
opinion, like from a,
So,
because it's like a small town basically, it's
yeah,
like, and
yeah.
he's the leader of it, and it's like,
So
I don't
I
know if
would
I should raise taxes or not, and it's like, you shouldn't, you really should.
So I would argue that there's no such thing as an unbiased therapist.
Okay.
I think there's actually danger in seeing yourself as being an unbiased therapist because everyone has blind spots. Everyone has, like I was talking earlier about how complicated it must be for superheroes from different cultures that are very different from each other going into other places, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have certain things to your identity, certain experiences that and so you can absolutely find ways to work with a lot of people and try and be open minded and come from a place of being non-judgmental. But to say that I come without bias is more like, those horses that like push carts and carriages and they have those blinders.
Yeah.
It'd be like if one of those horses says like, I can see everything. And it's like, well, they can see everything that they can see. but
Right.
they're not aware. They're not aware of what's outside of the blinders. And so if we say that we're without bias, what we're just saying is like we're not looking. So it's better to say
Okay.
I have biases so that you're looking for them and you can realize what those blind spots are, try and work around it. So,
Well,
in
I get
general, but I also hear what you're saying
yeah. Like
in
I guess
that.
my phrasing. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I think what you're talking about here though is the fact that it would be hard to it would be hard for him to find a therapist that um can be a neutral party.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially in the country where everything he does can potentially affect them. Like
And
it's one of those things like, yeah, of course, everyone's biased. Like, hey, what's your opinion of this? And I'm like, well, I think that sucks. And it's like, and as if I was a therapist, I would still probably think it sucked. I couldn't come to the table and be like, I don't think it sucks, right? You still have those opinions, but this is one of those cases where it's like, okay, what you say and do can potentially sway your sovereign leader, right? Like this
so
is
there's an added pressure, I would assume, and I would assume
yeah,
like, a physician for these folks is probably an added pressure. Um fortunately, fortunately, so T'Challa, you'd probably prefer to be physician, therapist, etc. too, than say Killmonger,
right.
right? So depending depending on the leader, it might be more or less stressful, more or less ideal. But I'm sure there's an extra stress or strain and sense of responsibility, even though of course you see everyone is important that you treat. But I'm sure there's an added layer there. You know, first off, I think there'd be a very high vetting process to make sure that someone would be reliable, high quality, but also be someone who's really going to stick to the ethics. And so what I mean by this is unfortunately there are scenarios where celebrities get treatment somewhere, or maybe not even what we might coin a celebrity, but someone well known for some reason, and people working at say the hospital or whatnot end up getting fired because they looked in the chart when they shouldn't have.
Yeah,
So we're still people too.
right,
You're gonna be tempted to be like, "Oh my god, I want to tell someone who I see as my client," when it's someone like that. There's
right.
probably good, unless you just work with all the big wigs and you're just used to it at that point. There's
Just
some part of you,
another king or queen,
just
whatever.
another king or queen, no biggie.
Yeah.
So there'd probably be like a very intensive vetting process. In terms of like, could he find someone in his own country? I think it's possible. And keep in mind too, like so if you're working with someone who's done things that require very high security clearances and this that and the other, most of the time they're not telling their therapist those details, but
Right.
they can talk in generalities. And this is one of those things, like knowing he's king and he gives you generalities, you still have a sense of like, okay, here's what we're working with.
Mhm.
um Eh, because you have a general sense of, okay, what is his job? What is he dealing with? What is he doing?
Mhm.
Um, and so there are ways to still get something out of treatment. Now, is he getting as much out of treatment as someone who doesn't have to create those limits and boundaries? Maybe not.
Mhm.
And also the types of treatments you do might vary also. So that's another option. Like skill building or doing something that doesn't require you to talk to someone, but they help you maybe envision it, or you do your own personal writing and things to the side, or creating these adaptations or using treatments that don't maybe require sharing as much of that information
Mhm.
might be useful. But I think you're right too, looking outside of the country could be good, where it's someone who isn't directly affected by your decision making.
Yeah.
Could be nice. It also means that you're working with someone who does not identify as being from Wakanda.
Mhm.
And so I think we've talked in a few different veins about how much or how little that might be important to someone could vary. So having someone who understands what it's like being from Wakanda, is
Mhm.
that important to him in terms of the therapist that he works with? It would depend on his preferences and the situation.
Mhm.
So I mean, he'd have to weigh the pros and cons, I think, with some of that stuff because it could be really nice to have someone who understands your culture, where you're from, your native tongue, all that different stuff.
Mhm.
And on the flip side, they're technically someone that you oversee. So
Right.
gets
Yeah.
get a little weird.
Yeah. Like, yeah, it's not right on the nose of, oh, I'm my boss's therapist, but it's like, it's degrees of separation for sure. Especially in
Yeah.
a small, I think it's just because it's a smaller country, right?
Mm.
Like it's a
So
much
it could feel like he's making decisions more directly involving you versus like say the president of the United States where yeah, of course they're doing things or like a senator or what, what have you. Yes, they're of course making these decisions and at the same time, yeah, I hear what you're saying. If the population's a lot bigger, maybe it doesn't feel as directly connected
hmm
to your daily life. Maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Huh.
going back to it though, I really do wonder like what it must be like, what it was like for him to do away with these centuries and centuries
Yeah.
of tradition of we keep everything a secret, we don't tell anyone anything, and we're going to share it with the world, the whole world. We're just
Yeah.
going to step out of the limelight and tell everyone about us and our technology. Like that had to shake the entire country, right?
Well, you see it starting to shake it beforehand, just in terms of I mean, there were ripples there because it didn't come up only from Killmonger.
Right.
There are other people from Wakanda that were already leaning in that direction. Now there were
hmm
others that weren't.
Right.
There, it wasn't as simple as it seemed from the outside.
Right.
So when you're just looking at the country simply, it seemed like, oh yeah, we're secret, we stay secret. But when you really start zooming in on the people, there were a lot more whispers there. I mean,
hmm
it, Killmonger had a lot of people still on his side when T'Challa ended up still being alive,
Right.
including people T'Challa was really close to,
hmm
turned and sided with Killmonger. So there
Right.
were clearly plenty of people who were open to this idea and were just waiting for the opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. Because yeah,
So,
and that's a good
actually, in
point.
some ways, maybe that helped him after all this. Because if you think about it, the people fighting against him wanted to open up to the world, and the people on his side, it's less clear.
Right.
So maybe if you fought for him, that helps you stay on his side. And then if you fought against him, it's like, well, at least he's opening us up to the world like we wanted to.
He definitely hit a sweet middle spot, right? Like we're not
Yeah.
going to war with the world,
Right.
but we're also not going to stay hidden a secret. We are going to
Yeah.
start helping people out
Yeah.
there because that was the whole thing with Killmonger. He's like, look at all these people suffering. We're gonna help them by giving them weapons to fight back against them. And it's like, yay, seems like this could use some more planning,
I mean, he was
right?
doing what he was taught.
Let's start with helping paralyzed people. We
That'd be
have the
nice.
cure for that. Let's just hit the hospitals first. How about that? We'll start there. We'll start there before we go full blown Ironmonger.
Yeah. Well, and
Right.
that, that was something new to Wakanda. Maybe not new to Wakanda, but he he made the suffering of people outside of Wakanda with the African background ancestry much more personal for
Mm-hmm.
them. I mean, he was one person removed.
Mm-hmm.
He literally had the tattoo to get in, and yeah, there was definitely a lot of. I mean, we've talked about this before. We
Right.
love this.
We do. It's so
So
good.
good, and yeah, T'Challa. He Yeah, I definitely miss his character. It's not the same from here because he's in a tough spot
Mm-hmm.
and yet he's this wholesome person who's not perfect. I mean in Civil War, he's essentially out to kill somebody who
Right.
killed his dad. But he's able to take in a lot and
Hmm.
process a lot in a short period of time. And I mean, he's once Captain America decides to actually share some information, he
Right.
actually helps the Winter Soldier. He helps
Yeah.
Bucky because he finds out that he's not the murdering son of a bitch he thought he was.
Right. Yeah.
so
It's like, okay,
so he's
it's cool.
I just love his character. And is he perfect? No, of course not. None of them are.
Right.
But he is dealt very complicated hands, and it was really cool seeing how he dealt with those.
He's a very good leader. It's
Yeah.
awesome superhero, but he honestly is an even better leader of his people because he's not just giving out orders, he's setting the example,
Mm,
which is a very big deal. It's easy to give out orders.
yeah.
It's easy to tell people go step on the front lines, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to tell them go deal with this. He's not just telling people, he's leading the charge. When Thanos showed up, he was the first one. Him and Captain America were racing each other
Yeah.
in the battle, right? Like and even then, they're not just seeing, oh, that's the vigilante of Wakanda. That's our king.
Yeah.
That's our protector, head first, leading the charge into battle. Like talk about a character, someone that gives their people hope, right?
And
And
gives their people everything. He
yeah,
gives his all.
yeah, he does 100%. And so, yeah, shout out to T'Challa. Rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman. Sad.
Thanks for nerding out with us. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown.
And I'm educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JVS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. And don't forget our Patreon page at patreon.com/bat therapy. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.